Hey, everybody, and welcome to Musings. This is Rob. As you know, this is my solo podcast where I just kind of muse about various topics. And today, I actually had a reader, write in with some questions about my latest video that I did with Jim Klinge of Bubble Info. I thought it was a great interview. I thought it was a great conversation. The background, the context is that Jim, who is a real estate broker and agent since sometime in the 80s, he's been very active in the San Diego area. And I felt like he really knows his stuff. I mean, he's seen it all. He's seen it come. He's seen it go. And he had a very popular blog back, I guess probably in like the 2009 and 2010 type time frame. Right after the collapse of the bubble. And it was literally called bubbleinfo.com. And I found it back then. It was sort of in the early days of my blogging of RENet. And I just really liked his take on stuff. But here we are, like over 10 years later. Not over 10 years, but you know what I mean? It's been a while. And he's been very active. And he and I are part of this Geek Estate Mastermind. And he had 2022 predictions, and one of his predictions was a buyer agency was going to go away. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about it. And he has some real different takes. Again, please watch the video. I'll see if I can link to it, in the show notes here. But basically his take is that not just like the FTC, DOJ, these lawsuits that are happening, but just market forces are going to drive buyer agency kind of out of the marketplace. And I just thought it was a cool take. It wasn't my take, it was his. And if you hate that take, then go argue with him, I guess. But it's not like a hate thing, but I did get a real interesting email from Hilary, hi Hilary, thanks for viewing. And I just thought I'm going to take this musing to just at least give my answers. I think it'd be cool. Maybe Jim could give his answers, as well. So I'll just kind of go through them and kind of offer my thoughts on these questions. All right, so these are some of our questions. Question 1. If buyer agency does get decoupled and the trend becomes buyers working directly with the listing agent, what does that mean for listing agents? To me, that's more work and more risk, so I would likely charge a seller more if there was not a buyer agent. Maybe not the full 6%, but it would be more than what the split would have been in the old way. I think this makes a ton of sense, right? So the idea is, okay, in theory anyway, when a buyer is coming represented by a competent buyer's agent, the work that the listing agent would have to do is significantly less because the buyer agent is going to do his part, do her part to educate the buyer, to guide the buyer, so that when the transaction happens, it's smooth, right? Her point is if there's no agency representation that way because it gets decoupled and a lot of buyers are just like, screw it, I'm just going to go direct to the listing agent, work directly with the listing agent. So be it. All right. So, and then her point, Hilary's point is that, this would then result in more work for her because she now has to deal with her own client, but also answer all sorts of questions from the buyer. So she'd end up charging more, right? Maybe not the full 6%, like she said, but certainly more than the 3% that would be under the current kind of model. I think that's really fair. I think that's a really great point. My only thought on that is, I think if there is no compensation, right, then the ability of the listing agent to charge, whatever it is that the listing agent wants to charge, kind of depends, right, on competition. Meaning, if you have competitors who are willing to charge 2%, 1%, to do the exact same thing that you're doing, at least on the surface, right? Meaning, look, and this is something that Jim and I talked about as well. If you happen to be an agent who's just a real expert in the area, every builder, every house, what side of the street it floods, when it rains, then maybe you're able to charge more. If you're able to sort of convince the seller of your value in doing that, maybe you're able to charge more. But the fact is, most sellers don't know that until they get into a relationship, they start working with you. I think there's going to be a lot of price pressure. That's just how I feel, if it's just one-sided. And the reason why I say that is because part of the lawsuit, so when this thing all popped in that initial lawsuit, there were a number of media stories. And in fact, I went and found one of coaching organizations talking about scripts that had to deal with commission sort of objection handling. And there's a video that I put up in my post. I've used in presentations. It's since been taken down. Otherwise, I would just link to it. But long and short of it is the training courses, the coaching material, basically what it was coaching agents to say is, listen, when the homeowner pushes back on the listing, you say, listen, I'm going to charge you what I'm going to charge you. But look, if you don't offer out this compensation, then no one's going to show your house. So therefore, it really put a floor on how low the commission could go. And this is something that other companies, sort of discount brokerages, have brought up, right? An example I think would be like, say, Redfin, who for years have charged 1% listing fee, but because you have to offer out the compensation, the difference in price is really not as significant, right? So we'll see. I totally get what Hilary's saying. If it's more work for the listing agent and I'm the listing agent, why would I not charge more, to my client, the seller? Right. Again, my answer to that is it makes perfect sense. And I guess we'll see what the market will bear. My sense, though, is that sort of depends on what your competition is also doing. And if everyone is sticking to the same model, somebody's going to come along and do it for less. That's just like nature of technology. That's the nature of advances. It's just going to happen. So I would just say be ready for that. Okay. Number 2, it's Hilary's point. I personally think that buyers would pay an agent directly, as I've had that situation already happen several times. However, don't you think that it would force more professionalism into the industry? Consumers would think a lot more about who they hire if they have to pay them. So our messaging and offerings would need to be much more well thought out beyond the fiduciary duty. Related to this, what about buyers that can't afford to pay? Well-educated buyers with more money than time will always appreciate an agent. I don't see the regulators allowing lower income home buyers to be left on their own. Would you see some sort of public service, almost like a public defender, put in place for those buyers that can't afford a buyer agent? I think it's a wonderful questions, wonderful points. So I agree with Hilary. And this is a point that I think I've made over and over again. I've used a buyer agent every time I bought a house. I think that a great buyer agent brings a tremendous amount of value. One of my objections to the cooperation compensation scheme, and even when I'm trying to defend it, I'm saying this is one of the indefensible things, is the fact that whether I'm working with someone who's a 30-year veteran, a true expert, really brings a tremendous amount of value, knows everything about the neighborhood, knows everything about the house, has seen thousands and thousands of transactions and knows the pitfalls, knows how to negotiate, knows all the things, that agent's going to get paid the same as a brand new agent who graduated from license school last week. I've always thought that this is a real flaw in the current system. And maybe by delinking, maybe the only positive, I don't know. One of the positives will be that we are going to see the higher value agents be able to charge more money or potentially get more business or keep the business or whatever the case might be because they've got the goods, they've had the skills, they have the knowledge. In a real way, it's like lawyers, right? Some lawyers can charge $1,000 an hour because they have the skills, they have the knowledge, they know what they're doing, and they have a long list of clients waiting to hire them, so they can do that. Other lawyers, they're new, maybe they're not proven, they can only charge $100 or whatever the case might be. So I do think that buyers would pay agents. I just don't know that it would be most buyers, right? I think that's the concern, that's the worry, right? And that's why, when this topic comes up, so many people in this year are talking about, well, we just have to change kind of the mortgage regulations to allow buyers to capitalize the buyer fees, et cetera. We'll see. But the second part of that question, and that is something I've been pointing out for a while as well. So Hilary, when you talk about these buyers who can't afford to pay, she thought, regulators aren't going to allow low-income home buyers to be left on their own. Possibly. So here's the part where I'm just not sure how it's going to play out, right? So if representation in real estate is as important and as vital as representation in a criminal lawsuit, then yeah, I could see something like HUD maybe having like a public realtor, imagine something like a public defender, right? A public realtor, you get paid by HUD, to represent the low income buyer. The problem is that term low income buyer, right? Like in 2022, in the way that our economy is right now, I'm trying to imagine if the so-called low income buyer would even get that kind of consideration, right? In other words, we're not talking about like helping homeless people become renters or helping low-income rental families in Section 8 housing deal with landlord-tenant issues. We're talking about people who apparently have enough money to buy a home. Do you know what I mean? And they have enough good credit so that they can go get, a mortgage for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I guess I have a little bit of trouble thinking that government regulators or legislators would classify them as being in need of such help that we're going to pay for their representation out of taxpayer funds. I mean, I don't know. It's possible. I mean, anything's possible. I guess I just personally have a little bit of trouble kind of saying, you're rich enough to buy a home, but you apparently can't afford to pay an agent, so we're going to have taxpayer funded representation for you. Maybe. I'll just say that I'm a little bit skeptical, about that piece. Now, having said that, a point that I've made in articles in the past is if real estate agents, if real estate industry, if brokers and MLSs and the Realtor Association really want to stress that having representation is so critical and so important for buyers, and a lot of first-time home buyers cannot afford to pay their own buyer representative, which is why it's necessary to keep this cooperation compensation scheme. Look, I think that argument is really strengthened if those brokers, if those MLSs, if those realtor associations started doing some pro bono work. So going back to lawyers, look, I mean, every major law firm I know of offers pro bono work. Pro bono meaning for free, right? For the good. And they'll do things like they'll represent, low-income defendants in criminal cases. So they'll represent, poor people in civil lawsuits, against big corporations because they know they can't afford to go take, I don't know, some big drug pharma company, to court for, all kinds of crazy shit that they're doing with pharma and bio, whatever, like opioid crisis or something. So, some firms will step up, say, look, we're just going to take care of this at no charge as pro bono. If Realogy were out there saying, listen, every agent in our roster spends 5 or 10% of their time doing pro bono representation of low-income families, then I think that argument carries a lot more weight. But since we don't, it's not like NAR is out there funding, low-income pro bono representation by realtor members. So when the industry's not doing it, to then say these people deserve our help so much we should have taxpayers pay their representation, I think it's going to be a tough road to hoe. All right, so that's 2. Third question, why isn't anyone discussing dual agency in these buyer agency conversations? I thought that would go away, at least same agent dual agency, not brokerage level dual agency. Well before buyer agency, it has never seemed in anyone's interest for one agent to represent both sides, except maybe new construction. Hilary, this is a great question as well, and it's something that over the years I've heard over and over and over again whenever we're talking about anything agency-related, buyer agency, cooperation compensation. Yeah, I mean, typically you'll have, especially sort of the better, more experienced agents talk about, why aren't we talking about dual agency, right? Why aren't we talking about single agent dual agency? Why aren't we talking about transaction representation, all of that? The short answer from my sense, I don't know. Right? That's my short answer. And when I say I don't know, I think, let me try and phrase it this way. Remember, I came out of sort of the law background, and I never really understood even brokerage level dual agency, right? I mean, yeah, it's in theory 1099, but like law firms don't have that kind of thing. If you want to do dual agency or even like slight conflict, you have to build, these like big Chinese walls and so on and really separate the teams. The firm itself is conflicted out, right? Whereas in real estate, the brokerage is not conflicted out, and they'll be like, well, the listing agent, who's the independent contractor, will represent the seller, and the buyer's agent is also independent contractor, will represent the buyer. It's kind of been tested. There was a lawsuit, I don't know, a few years ago against Coldwell Banker that had to deal with this specific issue. It really hasn't gone, anywhere. It's a great question. Why no one's really discussing it? I think it does get discussed. I know there's one guy that's constantly commenting. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's with like exclusive buyer agency movements in Canada. And I know Bill Wendell actually at Real Estate Cafe talks about this all the time, and they just want exclusive buyer agency or exclusive seller agency. It shouldn't be from the same company. Shouldn't, look, they make lots of good points, but it just isn't something that for whatever reason, the industry is not that interested in really pursuing. I don't know. Again, if I had to guess, I would say it's because buyer agency really wasn't a thing until the 90s. And buyer agency didn't come about because, real estate brokers and the industry felt like, wow, we really need to provide fiduciary, agent level services to these buyers. It came about because they wanted to avoid lawsuits. I mean, let's be honest, right? Before all that, it was designated agency. Everyone worked for the seller and everyone understood it. Like the reason why the buyer agent, the buyer agent was getting paid by the seller was because they were a sub-agent of the listing agent. And it caused some lawsuits. It caused some problems in the 90s. And brokers just said, this sucks. We don't, no matter how often you tell the buyer, I don't work for you, I represent the seller, doesn't matter. They think you work for them, so they're going to sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, blah, blah, blah. So they said, screw it. Let's just go to full-on buyer agency, listing agency. And for that reason, I don't think this was something that anyone from the start came out and said, hey, you know what we need? We really need to protect the buyer's interest. So therefore, I think it's just kind of naturally evolved this way, which is why we don't talk about it. All right. And then number 4, Hilary's question. What kind of pricing model do you see being brought forth as a solution for a buyer agent fee if not paid by seller? Obviously, people could still pay the current way. Redfin has a more a la carte model method. What else? Are you okay? Trying to educate yourself. Do you know anyone working to productize the buyer agency service, or do you think that is the piece that would be regulated? Would they go so far as to say how a buyer agent would be compensated, commission, hourly billing, etc.? Great questions. All. Let's work backwards, I guess. I don't see the FTC or the regulators coming in and interfering to that degree. Having said that, it's always a bad idea to bet against the government over-regulating. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind, I'm an ANCAP, right? I'm an anarcho-capitalist. So I don't want the government to have anything to do with this, but it just is what it is. It's what's coming. I think the maxim we might see, the strongest thing we might see is not the government saying, how buyer agents have to be compensated. I could see them saying how they cannot be compensated, meaning I could see them saying, look, you are not allowed to share commissions, right? Because this causes too much sort of agency conflict, right? But I could see, I don't see them come in and say, so therefore you must pay buyer agents by the hour. You must pay them by commission. I just don't see that. I think they would just leave that up to the buyer and the buyer's agent. Having said that, there's been a lot of companies, a lot of people over the years that try to, quote, productize not just buyer agents, like all services. I remember there was a company in Houston like 6-7 years ago that I really thought highly of because it just made sense to me. Why not do something like, look, here's our minimum base fee, and then if you want this service, it's another $1,000. If you want this, $500, whatever, right? Negotiations is going to be, $5,000, but if you don't need that, if you think you're a great negotiator, go have at it. It's that sort of thing. We just haven't seen that take off. It doesn't seem like that's what consumers actually want. So we'll see. What I think ultimately, though, so the type of pricing model that I see happening, especially for buyer agents, like I have mentioned in various podcasts and writings, I think we're going to go to something a little bit more like professional services, right? So really more like lawyers or accountants. I mean, here we are probably gearing up for tax season. We pay our accountants by the hour. That's just how it is, right? We pay our lawyers by the hour, unless, with some exceptions, right? The lawyers who are doing sort of contingency, they're really risking a lot of money. They're risking a lot of time, and they're going to take 35% of whatever's awarded. In other situations, lawyers get paid by the hour, maybe by the project. So you might have a real estate attorney charge whatever $1,500, $2,000 for a closing, right? I think that's kind of how I see things going for buyer agency if they are delinked, right? And I think it will be based around what sort of service are you going to provide, right? So, and what sort of qualifications, what kind of value can you sort of convince the buyer of, right? If you're someone like Jim and you say, look, I've been a real estate broker and agent in this market for 30 years and I know everything and I've done 10,000 deals, and then maybe he's able to say, look, and I'm going to charge you, $700 an hour, and it is what it is. If you don't want to hire me, there's plenty of other people who want to hire me. Maybe that's how it goes out. Maybe it's, a sort of a package deal, right? So in other words, like for $5,000, I'm going to do these things for you. And then if you could see all sorts of things that will come about. And I think it will, the main thing I think to understand there is it will be between the buyer and the buyer's agent, right? It will be between the agent and the client as to how the agent gets paid. A lot of them might just say percentage, because that's something that we're all used to. This is something that's worked for, 50, 60 years. A bunch of buyers might be like, yeah, no problem. Help me, really figure this out. I'll pay you 2.5%, right? Never know. Whatever happens to go. But I do think if you think about it, the percentage base doesn't really make sense for buyer agency, right? Because, hopefully what you want your agent to do as a buyer is to drop the price of the home, right? You want to pay less and you want to get more. So incentivizing that individual to get the price of the home higher seems like it just doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't do it, right? In this new world, I would hire a buyer's agent because I mentioned I think great realtors are really, really valuable, but it would probably be by the hour. Because look, you know everything. You know everything about this neighborhood. I think your advice is really valuable. I think you're a great negotiator. Please do it for me. Here's whatever, right? $500 an hour. I think that's how it's going to go. And for that matter, at that point, what's sort of another interesting possibility there for Hilary and for anyone else to think about is if you're getting paid by the hour, I think we could see a lot more teamwork happen, right? Meaning, let's say you're a buyer's agent and you do know everything about a particular neighborhood, but you know what? You really don't know a lot about, utilities, right? And maybe the buyer has some real questions around like how stable is the electric power here, and I really want solar energy. You go, listen, I have a buddy who's like a real specialist in solar and electric power. Let me bring him onto this team. He will charge you $250 for this consultation. Meet with I could see that happening, can't you? Right? I think there could be a lot of value in something like, I want to buy this condo, but I don't know about the HOA rules and government. Hey, I have a buddy who's like a real specialist in HOAs and condo associations in this area. Let's bring him onto the team and compensate him by the hour. I could see that happening too, right? So that's sort of my take on it. These, again, they're great questions. Like I said, Jim might have a different take on things. I'm sure other people probably have their own takes on things. But just thought I would spend this musing kind of offering my thoughts on that. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. If you have questions or if you have topics you want to address, let me know. I'm happy to do them. Thank you. Bye.